you brought some dignity back to that family.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think that's one of the special things is that these men who were such honorable people.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot to be a pro athlete, but then you have family and kids, and suddenly you're gone.
Gentlemen, we're live. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Some hometown heroes. Welcome home.
It's good to be back.
Dr. Chris Lewis.
Yeah.
I think today we're mainly going to focus on concussions. If you guys were here independently, we would go a little deeper into your personal stories. Both of you have very compelling, interesting stories. And unfortunately, I haven't been too keen on the work that you all have been doing, but you've been working on concussions and concussion protocols for a very long time now.
20 years.
20 years. And to build a foundation for our audience and to give you perspective as far as the podcast, there's not a huge niche. If I were to put a niche on this podcast, the audience is here because they want to learn why people do what they do. So it's not healthcare focused. It's not entrepreneur focused. It's fulfillment focused. And so to give people perspective as far as where you're coming from, can you share what events and experiences led you down the path of exploring concussions? Whoever wants to start.
Chris, you can start.
Thanks, Lewis. I'm older, I guess so. So I got interested in concussions not because I had an epiphany. It was because I got kicked in the head too much. So I grew up in the suburbs here, went off to, got recruited to play football at Harvard, got hit in the head a few thousand times there, thought I was fine, went on to wrestle for the WWE on Monday Night Raw, had a great time doing it, but those hits have a very small margin of error, and I got a few in a quick succession that gave me basically permanent concussion symptoms.
Wow.
And it was June 2003 when I got hurt, and back then we didn't have concussion protocols. We didn't have on-the-road doctors.
Yeah.
It was a mystery. And so when I got hit, I remember blacked out, didn't know what was happening, had this throbbing headache, but I told the trainer I was fine and kept working to the point where, and lying about how bad I was feeling and lying to doctors that they would send me to. And after 5 weeks of continuing to get hit, I developed REM behavior disorder. I started acting out my dreams, injured myself. And that's what it took to scare me straight. To tell them, I think there's something really wrong with me. And I said, you're not getting back into the ring until we figure it out. And my symptoms just never went away. And so it started me on this odyssey of, at first, how do I get better and get back to work? And then I can't go back to work now that I've learned what I've done to myself. But I might as well take a stab at trying to change the culture around this. I started reaching out to teammates that had retired from concussions and other people, and I realized that everyone was just quietly suffering and no one talked about it because having lived that in 2003, I was accused of stealing a paycheck by other guys at WWE who thought I was faking
Because
my
you would
injury.
sit out on matches?
Because I was not on the road working. But
you're still on the roster.
But I'm still on the roster. I'm still getting a small salary. And the culture was, if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. And so there were some people that were supportive, a lot of people who literally would pick fights with me if they saw me in the locker room. And people, there's some interesting stories. So when I finally met the person I co-founded the Concussion Legacy Foundation with, Dr. Robert Cantu, he taught me everything I was supposed to know. Rest your concussions, those dings and bell ringers matter.
He was the 8th physician.
Yes.
That you saw before you got a diagnosis?
Yes. Basically every doctor before that said you might have had a concussion and we don't know why you're not recovering. There's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And we'll just wait this thing out.
Right.
And he was the one who said, no, these dings and bell ringers that he helped me understand were actually concussions. They were happening in quick succession. And so I could point back and go, oh God, there were 2 6 weeks apart with no rest before after either one. That was probably the beginning of the end. And also this idea that there might be long-term consequences. And I was like, oh, gee, well, I probably wouldn't have been so reckless if I had any appreciation of that.
Yeah.
And so when he taught me that, I said, I can't go back to work. My head hurts all the time, but I feel like we should try to get the word out. And so I just started writing this book as my therapy. And it took 3 years to come out, called Head Games Football's Concussion Crisis. I actually was able to get big-time agents, and they couldn't find it at home because there was no audience for a book on complex neuroscience written by a pro wrestler.
Wow.
So I ended up getting dropped by 3 agents, and a colleague and friend just represented me, got me a $4,000 advance. I accused the NFL of covering everything up. because they were, and I had to pay $21,000 in insurance.
Good for you.
Libel.
Wow.
Yeah. Burned through the little money I made. But it was the truth. It was basically like, hey, the industry has been minimizing concussions because it's good for them. It's bad for us.
Yeah.
All these things matter.
Right.
They add up over time. And we should change what we're doing.
Right.
And that was sort of the idea of we should have protocols, we should have education, we should take care of these things. I wrote one chapter in the book about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, this long-term
And there's a difference
brain
between the
disease.
two, right? PCS and CTE.
Big difference. And that's
Yeah.
something everyone needs to understand if you're a young person with PCS, is that post-concussion syndrome, or what we now call persistent post-concussion symptoms, something from about the injury has affected you and led to long-term symptoms.
Wow.
And rehab will probably cover it. The right therapy will fix it. You will get better over time. It just takes time and the right therapy.
Okay.
It's not a degenerative brain disease. Degenerative brain disease happens with CTE independent of the concussions.
Oh, wow.
It's actually the repetitive hits you have to take. And usually you're talking thousands.
And even after you stop, the degenerative process continues?
Yes.
Wow.
You're getting CT while you're active in your teens and 20s. And then you walk away and it's silently progressing until the point where you can get dementia. And people are being diagnosed with dementia as young as their 40s, but it's usually in their 60s or 70s.
Yeah. That is wild.
So we started a brain bank at Boston University to start studying people. We've studied 400 NFL players. We've sort of changed how everyone looks at that now. And, my life has been like, it was just like this accidental kick that just led me on, like, we shouldn't do things this way. And all this series of events, and then partnering with the right people, the right scientists, the right advocates, all these heroic families, donating brains, athletes telling their stories. And we have changed the culture on concussions. We all know it's serious now. CTE, everyone's still in denial in a lot of places.
Oh, okay.
But, the NFL accepts it. But the NCAA, the NHL, this morning we were battling New Zealand rugby because we just diagnosed an athlete in New Zealand at our partner brain bank, and they still won't accept that rugby causes CT, which is entirely
Is it because it's
obvious.
not immediately seen?
It's because they're used. A lot of the sports industry and what the NFL was doing back then is sort of using big tobacco tactics of any long-term disease.
It's like-
you can say, well, it could be genetics, it could be this. You can just
Yeah.
come up with a list of things.
Oh, man.
And so it's an old playbook that's used by everybody. But we have advanced the science enough that we've convinced a lot of places to change. Just other people can hold out. And if they think their job depends on them preventing their organization from being sued by former players and keeping
Yeah.
kids getting enrolled,
Right.
then they're going to essentially lie about it or hire doctors to advise them with the information they want. And so you may not be getting the straight truth on this issue depending on the sport you're playing. Even in soccer,
So
soccer in the US
should they get an
denial.
independent evaluation
Should
outside of like outside of the sport, outside of that sports physician?
the sports physician is only going to be dealing with the concussion side.
Oh, okay.
On the concussion side, there's sort of good doctors everywhere.
Okay,
You may end up having to go to a concussion clinic, like a comprehensive, like we can treat just about everything that's wrong. Your standard doctor still doesn't necessarily know how to treat a concussion well, so they refer out. But the CT side doesn't come up, and that's the problem. Is it's sort of this silent issue. No one's gonna. There's no injury to show. There's no way to track it, and so there's no doctor saying, you really shouldn't get hit in the head thousands of times because it could cause this disease. Like that doesn't come up in a doctor's office. So we have to sort of get that information from somewhere else.
It's like it's coming up with the language and the questions to ask, and then identifying could it be one of those like signs and symptoms, or is it a combination of neuroscience and symptoms that lead to a CTE diagnosis?
We don't have a CT diagnosis while you're alive.
Oh,
That's
wow.
the other part of the problem. It's why we're asking people for their brains.
So yeah, when you are asking people for their brains, like what are they actually doing to the brains?
So when we get a brain to study, it goes to a lab, and at BU, Dr. Ann McKee leads a team of 60 people who will have a role in this brain. Basically, you take half the brain, you put it in a freezer to be stored in perpetuity.
Wow.
So you can use it for future studies. You can do genetic tests on it. You can do certain things. And half the brain is assessed. And it basically, the diagnostic part of it is you slice the brain into extremely thin sections.
Okay.
You lay it on a piece of glass. You take an antibody and you put it on top, literally on the tissue, so it'll stain certain types of damage and make them visible.
Wow.
So you see with CT brown spots, you see a protein called tau that's become changed.
Wow.
And that's how you diagnose it. Where is the brown? And there's a lot of different diseases they're looking for, but
And there's just you can't do that if
can't do all
if
your
you
life.
can't take the brain out.
We're trying to figure it out through blood and scans. So
Interesting.
PET scans, we're getting closer. And with blood, we're starting a study actually this month called Bank CTE. We're actually drawing blood to be banked, to be studied with the brain, because we think we figured out a pattern for an abnormal protein that gets into your blood from your brain when your brain is falling apart.
Kind of like a heart attack, yeah.
So yeah, so the blood-brain barrier gets leaky.
Wow.
And so we do that for Alzheimer's, and we will be able to do it for CT, but no one tried before.
Okay.
So we're sort of playing catch up on this disease that was ignored because we thought it was only in boxers.
Right.
Everyone knew it was in boxers by the 1950s worldwide, but we just ignored every other sport.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Before we go too deep, I want to hear your backstory into the world of concussions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but like here we are, right?
Yeah, here we are. It's not that detailed, but I started to have issues when I was around 16. I never really had, I guess you could say, awareness on what even a concussion was. But when I moved out to play hockey in Pittsburgh, I sustained my first one, and it was kind of just like, hey, you have a concussion, hang out in a dark room and come see us in a couple weeks and you'll be good to go. And that's all I knew. So, okay, cool. And at that point in time, we didn't have a team doctor. This was still youth hockey, where you don't have a team concussion doctor or whatnot. So anyways, that being said, came back, played, and was all good. And fast forward a couple years, I was playing juniors, which is a little more serious. Now we got team doctors and all sorts of physicians on our team. And I got one concussion. And right after that one, I got another one and another one. And all of a sudden I was going down this rabbit hole. And they were kind of going undiagnosed. But I knew, just because I didn't feel right.
Do you remember the actual, what do you mean not feel right?
Sense of dizziness, being off, light sensitivity, driving at night, and light beams hurting my head.
Did you share that with anyone at the time?
Share it with my dad.
Okay.
My dad, I know he doesn't know better.
Yeah.
I remember driving and telling Dad, I don't feel right. He's like, oh, you had a bad day, or you got headaches. He but he didn't know any different. And then I'd say the last one was the big one. I was in practice, and I was a goalie in hockey, so I didn't actually, get hit into the boards, but I got pucks to the head and other things like that. And I remember a slap shot to the head. I blacked out. I woke up in the ER, and I didn't remember a lot of it. And that was the same team, the same year where I was getting repetitive concussion, and the team doctors and no one did anything about it. That led me back home to Chicago, and it led me on a journey to find a proper doctor and different therapist. I tried all sorts of different therapies, and finally I found some things that worked. And that's kind of how I started my new, I'd say, chapter of my life from getting into Northwestern. I'm now a senior, and I graduate in 3 months.
Wow. What are you studying?
Social policy.
Cool.
Yeah. And then that's how I started Sty House, which is my youth clothing line, with an emphasis on concussion awareness and a partnership with CLF.
Yeah. Sty House stands for
Strength in the Youth.
Strength of Youth?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of my journey, but I'm around it every day. And
as far as your own signs and symptoms?
I definitely still have a lot of symptoms, but they're declining. I was actually diagnosed with something that's not PCS or CTE, but it's called POT syndrome. It's kind of something that's not talked.
The postural?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not talked about much, but the doctors feel that I developed it over the course of too many concussions.
So is it like you get lightheaded when you get up too fast?
Yep.
Or? Okay.
Yep. So my heart rate's really high.
Yeah.
So I have to take a prescription medicine for that, which is, I try to.
Yeah.
So
how many healthcare providers did you have to go through before you found kind of maybe not a solution, but some resolve?
I'd say 3 or 4 out east on the East Coast and 3 or 4 in the Midwest. So, let's say 7 or 8.
And then you said some things have helped. What are some of those things that have helped you diminish the signs and symptoms?
I think being active
really
has helped me. Working out. Now, after a concussion, not a hard workout, but being active.
Yeah.
And I think some other things have been different sort of therapies. Hyperbaric chamber has been something that's been somewhat helpful for me.
Is that easy to find? How many hyperbaric chambers are there?
There's not many.
Okay.
But that was something that
I wouldn't have thought that, actually.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty helpful. But yeah, some sort of eye therapies and just different sort of. I tried everything.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, you reach a point where you're kind of just desperate for a solution, and you are willing to try anything. I'm glad you guys have found some help, and now you're trying to spread that help to other people. From the pre-hospital healthcare provider's perspective, we talk about, as far as head trauma, we talk about from least to most severe concussions, and then there's subdural hematomas and then epidural hematomas. And we always emphasize epidural hematomas as the most severe in the acute pre-hospital setting. But from moving forward, I'm definitely going to emphasize the long-term effects. It's important to take into account, although they might not seek a hospital at this very moment, to talk about what signs and symptoms might manifest after this concussion.
Yeah, the concussion diagnosis in trauma outside of sports is an ignored issue. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that historically hasn't been trained. And so we have a helpline that's free for anyone who reaches out, clfhelpline.org. So if you've worried about concussions you've suffered, have long-term symptoms, reach out and we'll help you find the right people. And a lot of that is people, I was in a car accident, I had this injury, I had laceration, I had things that they had to do. And I went to the emergency room and I was discharged after a day, and no one mentioned to me, you got hit so hard you might have a concussion, and if you're not feeling right, you should follow up with a doctor.
Right.
And so it's constantly people who thought they were fine, and weeks later they're still not right, and now they're playing catch up. And
it's defining what not feeling right could be.
Right.
Right.
Especially if you're in polytrauma, you've got lots of reasons not to feel good.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's sort of this mystery issue that no one wants to own. Like ER doesn't want to own concussions.
Right.
They want to do life-saving interventions, and this one's just a monitor and then go to rehab.
That's what they think.
Yeah. And So I remember years ago we did a survey of emergency rooms and asked, do you have any paperwork for concussion discharge? And they didn't. They wouldn't give people anything. And you're talking about somebody you may not remember the conversation you had with the doctor. So it's sort of this bizarre, underappreciated issue.
Yeah.
That can send people down these rabbit holes if you don't handle it right at the beginning, or don't let them know that what you're feeling might be due to a normal injury that will recover in time, but you probably need rehabilitation. And if you don't get it, you're going to get miserable. Your relationships might suffer, your work might suffer, and it might spiral into this very bad place. Yeah.
There's always room for a public health education opportunity to just share things to look out for, how did you guys individually deal with letting go of something that was probably part of your identity, whether that was football and pro wrestling or hockey? And I feel many, the handful of hockey players I know, and I'm sure if you're trying to be an elite athlete or elite anything, you kind of have to go all in. And so being all in means it becomes part of your identity, if not all of your identity. You just sleep and eat and breathe it. What was your process of navigating that transition? And through that, what can you share with those that are maybe going through it right now?
So that was it's a great question. I directly was impacted by that because I was 21 years old. I had friends and peers that were graduating. college and moving on to the real world, and I had nothing. I had no money. I had no job. I was living at home in the basement, and I was 21. And I had peers and best friends and ex-girlfriends all graduating and getting jobs and you name it. And so I remember, besides Sty House and starting a company and Northwestern, it was, how can I impact hockey and be in hockey still, even with what just happened? So I got into coaching, and I started coaching kids, 6, 7, 8-year-olds in Winnetka. So my parents were living in Northfield, and I coached at Winnetka. And then that led me down a path to find passion and keep the identity of a quote-unquote hockey guy.
Yeah.
And I found a ton of passion in coaching kids.
Right.
And it almost led me to forget about, in a way, everything that happened. And then that has totally transitioned and taken a 360 to being the youth director at the Chicago Reapers, which this year was just ranked as the third best association in youth hockey in the U.S.
Wow.
And then, furthermore, upon graduation, I'm going to be signing with a sports agency and repping hockey players, and so. Big 360.
Wow, yeah.
But I'm still in the game. It's my career.
So when you identify athletes and kiddos that are like, you see the buy-in into the process and they're committed, is there anything you tell them off the bat, or do you kind of wait until they're starting to stress out a little bit?
When it comes to concussion?
Yeah. Or even just identity with the sport.
So identity, no. Except for encouraging them to play other sports. Okay. Not just play hockey. Okay. A lot of parents and kids these days want to just play one sport. I played football, lacrosse, hockey, basketball until 8th grade. And then high school was lacrosse and hockey. But so identity purposes, no, not really. But when it comes to concussion, obviously I'm super, as a coach, I'm super, I would say, aware.
Are you pretty transparent with your personal journey with them?
Yes. Okay. But with kids, it's with the parents.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of questions from the parents more so than the kids.
Have they been receptive?
Yeah.
Awesome. Good to hear that.
Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome.
So, and a lot of that's through Concussion Legacy Foundation and what Chris has done and knowledge that I've learned. I still don't know an immense amount about concussions, but if it wasn't for CLF, we wouldn't be here, but also I wouldn't have that knowledge to give to parents and give them over to a program and a foundation that has done a lot.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
thank you. Dr. Chris?
That's kind of you to say. I mean, it really takes the guys on the ground. I know so many young people he's mentored and gotten to a better place who've gone through what he's gone through, and that's a special thing. My identity, I don't know, it was everything happened so fast for me. I mean, I got basically at 03, I'm on Monday Night Raw, and my rookie class was like, it was me, John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Batista was my crew. And in Raw Magazine 2003, I was Newcomer of the Year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I should be one of those guys. And so God bless them. They've all had amazing careers and continue to do amazing things. I'm very proud of them. Also somewhat jealous, right? That would have been a very fun career to have.
John Cena came back with The Rock. Like to see all that, you got so far so fast, and to have it kind of pulled from you. I remember in a previous interview you said you weren't too tied. Your identity wasn't too tied. It wasn't hard for you to walk away. But why not?
Well, I hadn't done it long enough, I think.
Really? And you made it so far.
Yeah, I made it far quickly. It was great, and it was fascinating. Like I still look back, like when I lean on some of the things to be successful now. Like, sure, there's my training at Harvard, and there's my PhD, but sometimes it's the pro wrestling knowledge you learn. Like it's a fascinating culture. And a fascinating sense of like street smart and understanding like human psychology that you get from being in that sort of entertainment world.
When you say just I'm so curious, but like is it human psychology on the audience's behalf or in the people in the arena?
It's both. It's just sort of understanding what people want out of you. right?
Okay.
And if you can understand what they want from you, you can decide whether or not you're going to give that to them and how to give it to them.
Oh, wow.
And it helps you sort of play a role. Like, you know, when I'm out, you know, doing the things I have to do now, whether it's like calling families for brains, or whether it's presenting a scientific conference, or whether it's going to a scientific conference and protesting CT deniers with posters, which I did last year, and had a photo in the New York Times of me telling people that they're like, anyway, it's like I'm playing a role, but I'm playing the role I need to play for that moment, for what we're trying to accomplish and the people that believe in what we're trying to do. So anyway, I guess I was able to pivot quickly. One of the good things that happened was WWE at that time didn't fire me, so I was still able to sort of be part of the traveling group now and again and see everybody, and so I didn't have it ripped away. It was basically like 4 years of it. I left that world when Chris Benoit killed his family, and I studied. I reached out to his family to coordinate his brain study, and we realized I couldn't both work for WWE and do the study. Yeah. And so that's when that got completely pulled away, and it was persona non grata in wrestling for 5 years. But then they called me back and they said, we appreciate how far you've taken the science. We want you to come back and help us prevent CT and concussion. So since 2012, I've been training wrestlers on this. Once a year, I go to WWE. Now I do it for AEW. I do it for everybody. So I'm still part of that, like in a sense of that I still get to see those people and still get to enjoy that without having to take the beatings those guys have. And so I never had that pulled away. And then football, everybody has it pulled away from them at 21 or 22 who's still playing. Right. You know, a couple % go on to play pro. Everybody else, we don't grab helmets and go play in the weekends because we know how damn dangerous the game is now. And so, football's real benefit of football is that you do have those lifelong relationships. You're always sort of part of the club because you went through that pain with everybody. Right. So I got to just sort of be create my own persona. I was already sort of this strange Chris Harvard pro wrestler guy that was, no one's followed me in those footsteps either.
If you were to compare the two, your time at Harvard and your time in WWE, which one do you feel like you were leaning more towards as far as fit, like right fit? Where did you feel at most home?
That's a great question. I mean, it's one thing I figured out in life is I think differently than a lot of people. Okay. And so there were people that I at both places who I felt I fit in with, and then a lot of people I didn't. And I think that's sort of the story of your life. You find the people that, see the world the way you see it, and you have fun with you, spend time with them. So, but I'm generally an outcast in any group I'm in. Okay. Because, I don't know, it works for the work we do, but generally I'm a little different than most people, and I accept that now.
Can you share your time after the traumatic experience to the teeth of continuing to wrestle and until you made the decision to retire? Some of the signs and symptoms you were still experiencing, but it wasn't connecting the dots of
yeah. So the day after the bad concussion, the last one that ended my career. Not the last one I've had a dozen since then, but the last one that ended my career. I remember driving to the next show. I remember the arena was like an old arena that we had to walk upstairs to go into the entrance. And I remember walking up like 8 stairs and getting a headache. And I was like feeling nauseous. And I was like, this is not normal. Wow. And I remember I walked to the training room to tell them like something's wrong with me. And then I saw all the people getting ready for their matches, like putting on knee braces and like looking at the scars on their necks because they're wrestling with fused vertebra and like,
oh my God.
I can't, and I just I chickened out. I said, I can't tell them I can't work tonight because I feel, like a little off. And while they're out there wrestling through pain. Sure. And so I didn't. And so I wrestled that night. I went 20 minutes through a table to finish that match. And,
like off the ring or like, ring
in the ring.
In the ring.
Oh my Dudley's God. Again. Oh, they put me through the table to end the match.
I gotta find the highlights.
That one was his house show.
Oh no.
Yeah. And then they could tell something was wrong with me. So the next night we did Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
And Fit Finley was the producer on my match. And I told him I wasn't feeling right. And he could tell that something was wrong with me. And I think he was wise to this stuff. And so he just said, all right, I'll change your match. You're not going to get hit. You're not going to get hit. And so I just had like a 2-minute match with Maven. And and never took a shot. And then I said, all right, go see a doctor. And I went to see my one of my buddy's dads, who's like only neurologist I know, and he told me, take some time off. But he wasn't a concussion guy, and so a week later I called him up. I was getting nervous sitting at home, and and worrying about reputation, all this stuff. So I called him and said, "I'm fine, clear me." And I went and wrestled again. And there was no test to tell me it's not true. So you have to, so I did that and I kept wrestling. And at this point, my memory was so bad that I was telling the other wrestlers, like, hey, something's weird on my memory. I don't know. If I blank out there, like, I can't remember the finish. Just tell me what to do. And at this point, now someone would say, I'm not going to go out there with you if you can't remember what you're supposed to do, and you probably have a concussion. We should stop. Back then, it was okay. We'll cover you.
We can improvise.
Yeah. And so I did that, and I just kept pretending everything was fine. I couldn't finish a workout. I had a personal trainer. I go to the gym. I start knocking out some curls. I just get nauseous, and I just sit there and go, something's wrong. And no one at the gym ever said geez.
Well, nausea is such a generic symptom,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, but for like a decade, every time I got my heart rate up, I felt sick.
Yeah.
And, but I powered through it for 5 weeks, every day working out so I wouldn't get out of shape. I wouldn't, I had to look good, and I just buried myself with doing whatever the hell I did up there. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, no one knows. Like, it's hard we still don't have the science to understand, like, what did all those additional,
So upon meeting Dr. Cantu and getting some answers, did anything happen between that and maybe authoring a book, Head Games? Like, did anything happen with you?
Well, after 12 months of the chronic symptoms, I sort of pledged to myself, I can't go back. Like, if my head ever stops hurting, like,
you saw the value of the brain.
I saw the value of having a functioning brain after losing it for a year. Yeah. I just thought I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I threw it, like, the feeling of actually wanting to wake up in the morning.
Where did that mentality come from? Because I feel like people in that space, even as an athlete, it's hard to give that up.
Understandable. I don't know. I mean, I guess I had part of it is I had other options, right? I'd actually spent, committed to academics, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, I just couldn't imagine a world in which I was in pain every day. I mean, I think this comes down to pain avoidance. Like, I literally couldn't have performed the job. I couldn't remember the matches, and I felt terrible every time I moved around. And so there was not even a question of whether I wanted to push through it.
Whereas, like, the thought of no longer doing pro wrestling or hockey is more painful potentially to some people.
Right. Well, it depends on your symptoms.
Right.
But like, literally every time I exercised, I felt I wanted to be dead.
Oh, wow.
It was never going to happen.
Right.
No.
Right. So then you authored Head Games.
And so I literally spent all this time writing. Like, I started writing this book like furiously. Like, I just sat. So I would go to the Harvard Medical School library. And it was before you could like easily buy articles online, and I would photocopy everything. Sure. Like, I knew my way around the medical literature because I'd done this healthcare consulting between college and wrestling, and I'd photocopy. I still have like these stacks of highlighted papers, these quotes, and I just started like realizing like
this needs to be like put in a together.
This needs to be put together. Like I knew from doing it, every athlete would prefer to know how to have longevity in their career, and not throw it away out of stupidity. It'd sort of be like if you broke your leg and people told you, just keep running on it, you'll be fine, it'll heal itself. It's like it was that kind of level of medical stupidity that we were exercising at that time. And at the same time, the NFL was trying to tell us, like, when you're knocked unconscious, if you wake up, you can go back out. Nothing bad ever happens. Like, that was their policy that they defended when they were called out on it. So those 3 years, I was literally just, doing appearances for WWE and writing this book, and everyone thought I was crazy. And I was lucky that I got injured a few years later than Lewis did, because I could disappear from the world and nobody cared. Like, so like if I didn't want to talk to my family, like I just didn't talk to them, and no one came to check on me. So I could have those weeks where I just like would try to go to bed at 4:00 because my head hurt so much. I just wanted to give it tomorrow another try, or I would just drink through the stuff. And it was it was not healthy, but I had enough in place that it didn't get weird.
Okay.
And I just had this idea of I'm going to take a shot at making this happen. This is my penance for ruining my brain, doing something a little reckless.
Has the book since then been more receptive? Like received well? Like have you seen an uptick?
I mean, again, no concussion books ever sell. That's one thing we've learned. 'Cause other people have tried to write books too, and you realize like there's no money. Like no one wants to sit down and actually have to dress. It's a human side of.
Okay.
There's us who get interested in it because
it's personal for you guys.
It's personal.
Yeah.
But if it's not personal, you sort of figure you know enough that you need to know. So there's no joy in reading concussion. There's no joy. There's no good narrative. It's all the same sad story over and over again. It's maybe a better writer could turn into something, but no one has.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, luckily it did turn into a documentary.
Right.
So Steve Divick produced a documentary. They hired Steve James to direct, who did Hoop Dreams, Chicago Legend.
Oh, wow.
And so that was very cool to work with them to try to tell this story. And they did a great job telling it, but it's still a hard story to tell. People don't want to engage with this issue. And so the book just sort of is, you can still get it on Amazon if you want to.
You got out of your system.
I'm not here to sell my book. It's more of it was my credibility at the beginning.
Gotcha.
So that people would take me seriously. I'd done my homework.
Yeah.
And that's actually the whole reason why this whole thing started. Is when I was trying to get the book sold and I kept getting burned. I sent it a guy who did a book where he interviewed me for the WWE. And I read an interview where he said I was an interesting person to talk to. And I'm like, oh, he liked me. I'm going to call him. How do I get a book published? And he introduced me to Alan Schwartz, who at the time was a columnist for the New York Times. And I sent him a chapter, and he said he goes, yeah, the writing was fine. The bibliography was so impressive. Like clearly you had done your homework. And so he took me to New York, and he took me to Time Warner Books. He took me to all these places to try to get me seen. Nobody didn't work out. But when I got Andre Waters' Brain back in 2006. He was one of the first people I called to say, seems like a story that people need to know. Mm-hmm. And he not only got me in front of the New York Times, and basically I went down to New York and sat in front of the editors and like battled over.
Wow.
Jason Stallman went on record in the documentary nicely saying, I told Chris, I said, we're the New York Times. How do we not know about this? And I'm sitting there going, well,
now you know.
It's being covered up.
Yeah.
That was the story to me. And so they ended up let Alan write a front page story in 2007 and hired him to write 100 and something concussion articles over the next few years.
Yeah.
And that helped change things. But it was just this random series of events.
Andre Waters, was he a football player?
Oh God, how young are you? How old
I am, mind you, I'm not a sports guy. I'm 34.
You're too young. So Andre Waters, so in the late 80s, for those listening, when Bears post Super Bowl, we were going to go back, we were going to get another one, and the Eagles were the Giants and Eagles, they were our nemesis in the playoffs. And Andre Waters was a strong safety for the Eagles when they had some great teams and they beat the Bears. So I remembered growing up watching him. And he was nicknamed Dirty Waters because he loved leading with his head. And when he took his life, he was a Division II football coach, my age now, and he took his life randomly.
Oh, wow.
And I found a quote where he said I'd stopped counting concussions at 15, and it just was this spark of like, gosh, yeah. At that point, there were two NFL players.
I would love to look at his brain.
Well, yeah, I was just like, this sounds like the pattern that we understand with CTE, and so I figured somebody else was thinking about this, and nobody was. So I watched the newspaper for a couple of days. No one mentioned this random strange suicide. Maybe it was the hits to the head because no one had heard of it at that point. So I ended up calling the medical examiner, and I harassed him in Tampa, Florida, to study his brain for CTE. And it led to this dialogue where over weeks I convinced him that there was some science to maybe suggest that maybe if he had brain damage, it maybe could have led to depression, that maybe contributed to suicide. But he didn't want to really get involved. He wasn't a researcher, but he let me know per state law, he'd kept part of his brain. And he goes, if you can find someone to study it and get his parents' permission, I'll release the brain.
And how soon after were you starting this dialogue after his suicide?
So I started dialogue at least a week after.
Wow, that's soon though. That's soon.
What I learned is that to get the full brain, you actually have to start the dialogue you have 72 hours.
Oh, wow.
That's it.
Oh my God.
So this was just a lucky happenstance that he kept the brain. I didn't know they kept the brain.
Gotcha.
He was actually, I read about the funeral. I said, it's gone,
Oh, wow.
but I want to be right in this. I want to know if I'm right. And so the dialogue continued, and that's when I learned they keep brains. And then that's when I learned you have to call families.
Yeah.
And I ended up
88-year-old mother.
I tried to get everybody else to call the mom, all the doctors I was working with at the time, and no one would do it because they all thought it was bizarre. And I thought it was, and I just remember, actually, what I remember is I had this influential history teacher in high school, at John Hersey High School, named Mr. Nitz, and he had this phrase whenever we had College Bowl or something else, whenever you underbid or we weren't willing to do something, he'd always say, "God hates a coward." And I remember it just was reverberating in my brain of if I don't call her and we miss something here and more people die by suicide because they have this thing, I'm like, what kind of man am I?
Yeah.
And I'm like, how bad? Sure, it might be a shock to get this call, but I can figure it out. People are people. They get it. And I called a few times and finally, luckily the mother never answered, never had to talk to her. Until months later. The sister answered. And they were just a wonderful family who wanted to know what happened to Andre. And so after a series of calls, they said, we believe in what you're trying to do here. We'd love to know what happened. And they said yes. And that led to me now calling people every day. I have to make calls now.
You still do? I thought. With the donor card and stuff.
I tried to put myself out of business. So 80% of the brains that BU studies are people calling us.
Nice.
10% are medical examiners calling us. But
Nice.
there's still those cases in the public interest, new sports.
Gotcha.
Young people, families don't think about it, but it's so I still have to make some calls.
Okay. I think as human beings, we want to make sense of the world, and it's to provide an opportunity to connect the dots of this is bizarre behavior with something that could have make sense. It's very cool, and I'm you brought some dignity back to that family.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's one of the special things is that these men who were such honorable people.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to be a pro athlete, but then you have family and kids, and suddenly you're gone, and sometimes you've really veered off course.
Yeah.
The brain doesn't always answer everything, but boy, do we see a lot of patterns in there.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that first year was very, very tough because we went from Waters to Justin Strelzik, who had been hearing voices and then died in a police chase at 36. Was an NFL offensive lineman. And then Chris Benoit, my colleague at WWE, who I knew well, who had taught me how to throw a decent forearm on his own head, who everyone loved, started, I heard later, I didn't know at the time, had started acting strangely. And then didn't show up to a wrestling show, and they went to his house and found that he'd killed his wife and killed his 7-year-old son and killed himself.
Murder-suicide.
And he was the only wrestler who cared about the book I was writing.
What?
He had, I was backstage at a show, and he sat me down and said, "Tell me about this book you're writing about concussions." He asked me to tell him my story. I said, "How many concussions do you think you've had?" And he said, "I've had more than I could count." And he gave me a cell phone. He said, "Give me a call." I'd never had a cell phone. And so I called him the next week, and it sounded like he was in the middle of an argument with somebody. And he said, "I'll call you back." And he never called me back. And so when I heard this happened, I realized, he knew something was wrong with him. And he wanted answers, and I blew it because I didn't chase him down. I didn't give him the help he needed.
It's a coincidence. That's awful.
No, it's not a coincidence at all. It's literally that's what we try to do now is when people...
In the sense of shouldn't feel guilty.
Well, everybody's ever lost somebody in a situation like this. Is the same, what could I have done? But this one was very specific. He wanted to talk. I needed to hear him out. I don't even know if I knew how to help him at that point because this was early days. But the idea that a phone call could have stopped that from happening... And the sad part is that it keeps happening. We have multiple murders in our brain bank who've killed strangers, have killed loved ones. It's serious.
I wonder how many people are facing trial that could be, kind of caused by head trauma, concussions.
People are finally talking about that because traumatic brain injury, even independent of the neurodegeneration, will change people's behavior. It increases your risk of all sorts of, behaviors, violence, schizophrenia, all these things. It's different. traumatic brain injury is different in everybody, though. So there's never great patterns because it all depends on what did you injure, what part of your brain, what does it control, how does it act with the networks.
And your work with the blood hopefully will help the people that are still living, right? Because
that's the goal. There's a lot of people suffering out there. It just since then I've lost the captain of my Harvard team.
Oh wow.
He drank himself to death, and he lied to his wife that he'd reached out to us for help.
Oh.
So when it got to him, it was too late, and I just had another teammate reach out this week, and it's like it's just it's a lot. There's more people dealing with this than we want to believe. And we're not talking about it enough, and we're not trying to prevent it, and there aren't places for people to go yet.
And then the people that aren't even aware, right?
And there's people that's not even on the radar screen. Yeah,
right.
That this could be related.
So how many iterations in, it could be football, it could be hockey, even the military, how many iterations have you noticed, like, with protocols been made? How many versions have there been as the research has gotten better?
That's a great question. They're revised every few years.
Okay.
The most interesting one that reminds you of Lewis's story is the idea when he was hurt, we had flipped from, like, when I was injured, I was like, gosh, if I only would have rested, I would have been fine. Turns out resting can be bad for you if you do it too much after a brain injury.
Wow.
And so the advice when Lewis hurt in 2016 was generally go sit in a dark room till your head feels better. But sitting in a dark room in isolation is a form of torture in prisons, right? It's not good for your psychology. It's not good for your brain.
Okay.
And your emotions. So now the recommendation is if you get a concussion, shut it down for a day or two. 24, 48 hours. But then start trying to integrate back into your life. Your brain needs and wants that stimulation. Go for walks, as long as it doesn't provoke symptoms. And don't isolate yourself. Get your kid back into school as they can tolerate and all. And so it's a reminder of, like, trying to, going too far the other way.
Sure, yeah.
And Lewis suffered because of that. I mean, I guess the choice was keep going out there and getting more concussions, or sit in a dark room and have these chronic symptoms. I guess the second one's better because you're good now.
Yeah, good enough.
The other path,
typically extremes of any kind are not great, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But I think that's probably the biggest change.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with large organizations like the NFL, I know it's very bureaucratic and it's hard to implement change. No one, we're all creatures of habit, and I can't imagine how frustrating it is to continue to see athletes injure themselves when things could have been implemented. So I guess, like, is it finding the right people to talk to, or is it, like, how do we make it personal for the people that actually can implement change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always said, do you want to fix football practice? Make the coaches go in with a helmet on and do the drills. Because probably the biggest thing we're pushing now is that while we have concussion protocols in sports, we don't have CT prevention protocols. And we could. It's pretty simple. The fewer times you're hitting the head and the less strength you're hit when you are hit will decrease your risk of CT. The NFL buys into this. That's why we just changed the kickoff, right? The kickoff is now going to be completely different. There's no longer a 40-yard sprint.
Oh, wow.
They're all going to be lined up 5 yards from
I
each
didn't know
other.
that.
Oh yeah,
That's
it
amazing.
happened 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So it'll be weird to everybody, but it's smart because the kickoffs are the worst plays in football. So the question is, how do you get there? Well, the NFL is on their fifth chief medical officer fifth head of their medical concussion stuff since I've been there. He actually gets it.
Okay.
And almost 20 years of beating up the NFL has changed their hearts and minds on this issue. They realized at the beginning they said this wasn't a real. Now that we have 400 NFL players with CT and it's 91.7% of all the ones we've ever studied, they're like, we should.
NFL.
Yes.
Wow.
We should do something about this. So, but none of that's being done at the college level.
Okay.
So in college, 20% of head impacts at the NFL level happen in practice. It's 70% in college.
Wow.
So every year in college it will increase your risk of CT much more than an NFL year.
And what about even younger than that?
In high school is a crapshoot. And the IHSA has been a friend on some issues, but the high school high school football is in denial that they're giving kids CTE. Youth football. The idea of now of lining up with what we know about CT and knowing that it's just related to how many head hits you get, the idea that kids are playing Pop Warner at 5 is insane to me. But yeah, so we have a campaign called Stop Hitting Kids in the Head. And that is the advice I would give anybody.
Okay.
Is that there's never a good enough reason to hit a kid in the head. And if they're playing a sport in which they're getting hit in the head frequently, change the rules of the sport or don't let your kid play.
Are kids' brains more sensitive to concussions then?
It's a complex question.
Oh.
Kids take longer to recover.
Okay.
The biggest thing we have to realize is that when you give a child a brain injury, you are changing who they become. You're literally rearranging how their physical brain, how their brain works, the experiences they're going to have.
Wow.
And so I remember there was a great CDC doctor said, it's really hard to measure the impact of concussion on a kid because you never know who they were supposed to become.
Oh my God.
So the fewer concussions we can give children, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah.
So actually tonight I'm going to meet a young man that Lewis has been mentoring who basically had to give up sports. And his first bad concussion was at 7. He got a few more. He's now 10. He cannot play contact sports anymore.
Can you tell me about him?
Yeah. Local kid from the North Shore.
Yeah.
And his mother reached out and just said, "Hey, I've learned about your story." Her older son played hockey and stuff, and he was in a bad spot. Just he was losing friends, and not necessarily losing friends, but he had a lot of friends that he met through sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of took him under my wing, and we got to hang out, talk about life, play some golf. I was a support system for him. He was able to open up to me. And then that led to him actually creating his own shirt through Styhouse. I said, hey, if you want to make 50 is my minimum order, by the way. If you want to make 50, you can design whatever you want on it, and we'll donate all the proceeds to CLF. So he did, and it went well, and he actually put his number on it and my number on it from when I was playing. And it's, but yeah, he's been doing much better. And he'll be at the event tonight that Chris and I are going to be at later.
Oh, wow. Are you aware of any of his current dreams and aspirations?
Super smart. Super smart. He probably does math better than I do at 10. So I'm not sure, but whatever he does, he'll be successful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You won't let sports become a distraction.
No.
Like I did. When I was put in the Thomas Middle School Hall of Fame, I said, for sports, I said, I was the 8th class, which means I'm like the 30th best athlete at the school, which is not that great. But I said, to be honest with you, my people here when I was here were my mathletes and my Science Olympiad guys, and sports drew me away. And now I'm back. And I appreciate that but I don't know if you know this, 8th grade Science Olympiad state champion.
Wow.
Back in 1991.
What were you building?
This one, this one was more. It was called Road Rally. It was like a map reading orientation thing. So I'm very good at reading maps.
Right.
FYI. But point is that Jack,
Yeah.
First name only. I have very high hopes as a smart kid. For a kid like that, the experience will only make him stronger, and he'll find his path. But we overemphasize sports in our culture. There's no question about that.
Yeah, we
and
do.
I think people need. So sometimes a concussion, a well-placed concussion, can lead to a better path.
Is that is there a wing of CLF that is a home for people that are that experience
Yes.
CTs and PCS?
Well, we have a helpline. So basically,
Helpline.
we have 4 full-time staff members who intake people who are struggling.
Yeah.
And one of the things we do besides getting to the right doctors is we have support groups and we have one-on-one peer mentorships.
Gotcha.
And so we have peer support volunteers who've basically been through it, like what Lewis is doing on his own. And we take other people that we've helped who've gotten better to say, we're going to match you with someone a few years younger with a similar experience who needs to hear that you're doing okay.
And it's such a two-way street, too.
Yeah. Oh, they love it. People, becoming a mentor, Lewis loves it. I love it. Like, you find value in trying to help someone because everyone who does it feels so alone.
Right.
Because the odds that someone who's been through your experience in your social network is like 0.
Yeah.
But so these matches are very special. And go live on, and now we're at a point where we have like people who have matched like 5 generations of matches, and it's just it's neat.
Is there an industry that you haven't tapped into that you want to tap into? We haven't really talked about the military. I'm not sure if the military applies, but
that's the other big thing.
Okay.
Is that we have a program called Project Enlist. We're trying to create a brain donation. Like, we get 1 out of every 4 NFL players who dies, their family calls us.
Wow.
If we could create the same body of evidence of veterans, I think we'd get DOD and VA to even invest more into this.
Wow.
To help these guys, because TBI is just still an underappreciated thing because it's not on a scan.
Well, I think veterans in general are underappreciated, right?
Yeah.
And to give them a role, it could be a mentor role or another role. But
exactly. Well, we do have that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're running out of time.
Okay, no worries. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, I guess, the standard, if you are struggling, reach out to clfhelpline.org.
Yeah.
If you are an ex-athlete or veteran who wants to help create solutions, sign up to pledge your brain to us at pledgemybrain.org, or there you can sign up for our research registries. We're trying to figure out how to diagnose and treat these issues. Don't let people hit your kid in the head. And if this issue is meaningful to you, concussionfoundation.org, get involved, reach out. We need all the help we can get. Every Lewis Simon we find that we partner with, we are helping more people, and it makes the work a lot more fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I would just say, I think teenagers have a hard time speaking up. So speaking up in front of your teammates, or just bringing that awareness to a locker room, whether it's hockey, football, lacrosse, whatever it might be, do it, because you don't want to end up with any sort of issues down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Appreciate the time, guys. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. Enjoy the time tonight. You're doing great work, and I hope more and more people become aware of the work that you're doing. Till then, everyone, stay curious. That's it, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.